How are a bunch of ill-equipped Houthi rebels able to down a US MQ-9 Reaper? Just how vulnerable is this $30 million aircraft, right? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk a little bit about this. Okay, so this is the overall story here. This is the third time a U.S. Reaper drone has gone down in Yemen. And what's interesting about the Reaper, well, there's a couple of things. First off, MQ-9 Reaper, right, unlike the Shadow, this is an armed drone. This is something that engages in combat operations, or at least it can. It can also be used for observation. It has a long loiter time and a significant enough payload to carry some Hellfire missiles. But images released Wednesday show that the Houthi rebels are able to down these kind of aircraft. And the fact that it is the third downed in the course of this conflict should start to raise some warning bells. The reason is, well, sometimes planes have mechanical errors, they're forced to land, but there's some things about this that really should raise your suspicions. And what's also interesting is that when Voice of America asked a U.S. defense official, he said that, quote, the U.S. Air Force has not lost any aircraft operating within CENTCOM's area of responsibility. That includes Yemen. The official did not elaborate. The CIA, though, is also known to have flown some Reaper drones over Yemen to monitor the war and in its campaign against al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. And the CIA didn't have anything to say, which is itself sort of interesting. Now, here's what's kind of also interesting, right? We know that the Houthis have been very active, stepping up their attacks in the Red Sea, Gulf of Aden, ostensibly to pressure Israel to end the war in Gaza, but it also conveniently benefits Iran, who doesn't give a shit about what happens in Palestine either way, right? If they cared, they would do literally anything. Now, here's what I find most interesting is the actual footage itself of the downed aircraft. So you can see it was downed in Yemen, but one, as the AP points out, the drone has no official markings on it. Generally, U.S. military aircraft are going to have U.S. military markings. Here we go. Here's a blown up photo of it. You can see there's two details that are notable. One, total lack of markings, no kind of identification at all, which is honestly sort of stupid, right? We know who operates Reapers, not that many. And the fact that there's no markings makes it look more like CIA. Does that make sense? Right. Whereas if they were just put on some generic Air Force markings, it would look like it could be an Air Force aircraft, right? And so that kind of thing is, like, to me, just like classic CIA, right? Where, like, through years of basically having their primary job be countering unsophisticated people like the Houthi rebels, right? Where they just get to play kind of weird, dumb games, right? Nobody's actually questioned assumptions about, like, is it worth it for us to have unmarked aircraft? Like, is it really going to affect attribution if we don't have markings on it? But the second thing that I thought was more significant is that this thing is intact, right? Because the Houthis claim they shot it down with a surface-to-air missile. Here's the problem. Let's say the missile damaged a portion of the aircraft, right? One, if it damaged the aircraft would fall from the sky and crash. But let's say it only partially damaged the aircraft and it wasn't able to get to the air station, right? It'd get to a safe landing zone. Well, what the pilot would do to avoid the aircraft falling into enemy hands, exactly what happened, they would nosedive the aircraft, right? They would literally try to destroy the aircraft. It's unmanned. So destroying it to prevent it from falling into enemy hands is the next logical step. So the fact that neither of those things happened and that the aircraft went through some kind of landing sequence in the desert and landed largely intact says that at some point during the flight, the controllers lost control of the aircraft, right? And that is interesting, especially when we consider the possibility that the Houthis, right? I think it's important to remind you, the Houthis are directly supported by the Iranians for at least 15 or 20 years. So the Houthis operate very, very closely. They're seen as proxies, right, of Iran. Now, when you consider the fact who else has recently demonstrated on the battlefield to have the capacity to thwart the GPS signal, the GPS guidance system of US-made weapons. Well, we know what Russia does, right? And we also know that the Shahed drone system is something that Russia has purchased at large scales from Iran. So it would not be a crazy theory to say that Russia's GPS jamming system, something that is tailor-made to disrupt the GPS trackers of US-made weapons that rely on them for guidance, could work its way to Iran, who would then, of course, place it where US weapons were highly likely to be deployed, namely the Yemen area, the Gulf of Aden. So my thesis is that this is actually, and I don't know if it's a Russian, I don't know who made this GPS jamming technology, right? It could have been made by Iran and sold to Russia, could have been made in Russia, sold to Iran, but I suspect very strongly that this system is being employed by the Houthis now that it's public, right? Russia may have said, listen, we don't want this. We want to get exclusive use of it on the battlefield. We want the first bite at the apple, so to speak, right? So Iran will share the tech with you, but you can't export it to the Houthis. And Iran likely said, okay. And then once it became public, once the Ukrainians said, listen, we know you're jamming GPS with your GPS jammers, Russia said, cat's out of the bag. It's all yours. And the Houthis likely used it to, again, deployed it. We know it can sit on a single point in the ground and form a cone of jamming that effectively blinds a system from GPS. A lot of these drones do have some kind of default programming that says, hey, when they're not sure where they are, they just sort of engage in a landing sequence. So again, this level of sophistication is more than I would expect from the Houthis, certainly. They did not engineer this themselves. Likely the Iranians they can be very sophisticated, right? The Shahed drone is no joke, but they generally aren't like moving the ball forward in terms of tech. Russia is, though. Russia's doing things on the battlefield that are new. So I suspect that is the thread here. That is the story, so to speak. Now, guys, if you're interested in getting the inside scoop in a lot of U.S. conflicts around the globe, twice a week, I do a deep dive analysis of the viral combat footage, right? It's oftentimes the kind of stuff that I can't show on YouTube. It's basically always. It's like the GoPro footage, the stuff that YouTube used to allow for conflicts, but now it doesn't because things are getting a little too real for YouTube's taste. That's all on combatvetnews.com. And because, again, YouTube demonetizes a lot of my content and I depend, and a lot of sponsors don't want to touch me, I depend on you guys, the audience, to support me. So if you want to support me, right, Specialist tier will get you access to all those exclusive videos. But if you want to get the shout out at the end of the videos, the Lieutenant tier and even the Colonel tier get you guys the exclusive shout outs. We're working on some more benefits for the Lieutenant tier, so you definitely want to get it on the ground floor when we announce it. But if any of you guys want to support us, right, Combat Vet News, link is in the description. Thank you guys so much, and a huge thank you to the members of Combat Vet News. If you appreciate this kind of content, right, I know it's not directly Ukraine related, hit a like, right? It helps tell the YouTube algorithm that I make good content that's not just Ukraine war, and that means a lot to me. So thanks so much, guys, and I'll see you in the next one.